The emergency klaxons echoing through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council chambers had never sounded quite this desperate before. Ambassador Phlox, whose gills were currently fluttering with what could only be described as existential dread, shuffled his webbed feet as he approached the speaking podium. His translucent scales had taken on that particular shade of nervous green that his species displayed when they were about to deliver catastrophically bad news. "Esteemed colleagues," Phlox began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had drawn the shortest straw in galactic history. "We have a problem. A big one. The kind that makes previous problems look like pleasant misunderstandings about tax policy." Council leader Vorthak, a particularly pompous insectoid whose compound eyes could express disdain in 17 different spectrums simultaneously, clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "Ambassador Phlox, please get to the point. Some of us have entire civilizations to oppress today." Phlox's gills fluttered faster. "Right, well, you know how we recently accepted humanity into the galactic community? That backwater species from the third planet of the Sol system? The ones who somehow figured out faster than light travel, using what they call duct tape and a really good guess?" A collective groan rippled through the chamber. The humans had been something of a controversial addition to the galactic community, primarily because they had a disturbing tendency to solve complex problems with solutions that made absolutely no sense to anyone else, yet somehow worked perfectly. Yes, the humans," Vorthak buzzed impatiently. "What about them?" "Well, as per galactic tradition, we're supposed to present them with a cultural exchange artifact. You know, something that represents the trust and cooperation between our species. A symbol of welcome into the cosmic family." "Obviously," Vorthak replied, his tone suggesting this was about as obvious as the fact that breathing oxygen was generally considered helpful for most carbon-based life forms. Phlox's scales had now progressed to a shade of green that was approaching neon. "The problem is, we've run out of safe artifacts. The singing crystals of harmony went to the Deltans, the peaceful meditation orbs went to the Centaurians, and don't even get me started on what happened to the gentle wisdom scrolls after the vegans got hold of them." "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Vorthak asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer and was really hoping he was wrong. "Well," Phlox continued, his voice now barely above a whisper, "all we have left in the vault is the nexus of eternal flames." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that could be bottled and sold as a particularly effective form of cosmic dread. It was the silence of an entire council, suddenly remembering why some artifacts were kept locked away in the first place. "The nexus," Vorthak repeated slowly, "that can theoretically harness the power of a dying star and redirect it into a focused beam of pure destructive energy, capable of cracking planets like walnuts?" "That's the one," Phlox confirmed miserably. "The same nexus that our predecessors locked away with 17 different containment protocols and a warning label that roughly translates to 'seriously don't even think about it.' Technically 18 protocols, but yes, that's the one." Vorthak's antennae twitched in what could generously be called contemplation, but more accurately resembled the final moments before a complete mental breakdown. "Ambassador Phlox, surely you're not suggesting we give the most dangerous artifact in known existence to a species that thinks percussive maintenance is a valid repair technique?" "I'm not suggesting it," Phlox replied, his voice taking on the tone of someone who had already accepted his fate. "I'm saying galactic protocol requires it. We can't make exceptions without a unanimous vote from all 732 member species, and you know how long that takes. The last time we tried to get a unanimous vote, it took 4 centuries just to agree on what color the voting forms should be," muttered Council Member Zephyr from the back row. Vorthak's compound eyes somehow managed to convey the exact moment his faith in galactic bureaucracy finally died. "Very well. But I want it on record that I think this is quite possibly the worst idea in the history of terrible ideas. And I once witnessed the Altarians try to negotiate peace using interpretive dance." "Noted," Phlox said, though he was pretty sure that particular record wouldn't matter much once the humans got their hands on a universe-ending weapon. "I'll prepare the presentation ceremony." As the council members filed out, muttering in various languages about updating their wills and considering early retirement to distant, uninhabited star systems, Phlox remained at the podium. He stared at the official paperwork that would authorize the transfer of the Nexus of Eternal Flames to humanity, and wondered if there was any chance the humans might just use it as a paperweight. Unsorted ass. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that he was about to find out exactly how creative humans could be with things that weren't supposed to be creative at all. Meanwhile, approximately 735 million miles away on a small blue planet that most of the galaxy still considered a cosmic accident. Jake Thompson was having what he would later describe as just another Tuesday morning, except with more aliens. Jake was the kind of guy who had made peace with mediocrity and found it surprisingly comfortable. He worked IT support for a mid-sized insurance company in Denver, drove a Honda Civic that made concerning noises when it rained, and his biggest life achievement to date was successfully keeping his office plant alive for 6 consecutive months. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of person the universe seemed to enjoy placing in absurd situations. He was standing in his kitchen, contemplating whether cereal counted as a proper breakfast when you were 32 years old, when a bright blue beam of light suddenly enveloped him. Most people would have screamed, or at least dropped their coffee mug. Jake just looked at the beam with the same expression he used when his computer started making those beeping sounds that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Ah," he said, as he felt himself being lifted off the ground. "That's new." The next thing he knew, he was standing in what appeared to be the bridge of a spaceship, surrounded by beings that looked like they had been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on what constituted a life form. There was something that looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a filing cabinet, a creature that appeared to be made entirely of geometric shapes, having an identity crisis, and what Jake could only describe as a very apologetic-looking fish person. "Greetings, human," the fish person said, his voice carrying the universal tone of someone who really, really hoped this wasn't going to go badly. "I am Ambassador Phlox of the Galactic Council. Please don't panic." Jake looked around the bridge, taking in the blinking lights, the incomprehensible alien technology, and the fact that he was apparently now in space. He nodded thoughtfully. "Okay, 2 questions. First, how long is this going to take? Because I've got a department meeting at 9, and Karen from accounting gets really passive-aggressive if people are late." Phlox's gills fluttered in what might have been confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" "And second," Jake continued, apparently unfazed by the fact that he was having a conversation with a talking fish in outer space, "do you guys have coffee? Because I was right in the middle of making my morning cup and I'm not really functional without caffeine." The ambassador's scales shifted to a pale yellow color that indicated he was beginning to suspect that humans might not react to first contact situations the way the training manuals had suggested. You're not concerned about being abducted by aliens?" Jake shrugged. "I mean, it's definitely not ideal, but it's not like it's the weirdest thing that's happened to me this week. On Monday, my neighbor's cat somehow got into my apartment and reorganized my spice rack. At least you guys seem organized." "We apologize for the sudden nature of your arrival," Phlox said, clearly working from a script that had been written by beings who assumed humans would be either terrified or trying to worship them. "You have been selected as humanity's representative for a very important cultural exchange ceremony." "Cultural exchange," Jake repeated. "Like a student exchange program, but with more interstellar travel?" "Something like that, yes." Jake nodded again. "Cool. Will I be back in time for the game tonight? Because it's the playoffs, and I've got money riding on this." 2 hours later, Jake found himself standing in what the aliens called the Grand Ceremonial Chamber, but which looked to him like someone had crossed a cathedral with a disco ball factory and then hired a committee of people who had never seen either to do the decorating. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly, and the floor was made of something that felt like marble but occasionally hummed show tunes. Ambassador Phlox stood at the center of the chamber, looking like he was attending his own funeral. Beside him, Council Leader Vortak had arranged himself in what Jake assumed was a position of dignity, though it mostly looked like he was trying to solve a particularly complex geometry problem with his limbs. "Jake Thompson of Earth," Vortak began, his voice echoing through the chamber with the kind of reverb that suggested the acoustics had been designed by someone who thought subtlety was a type of alien cuisine. "You stand before us as the representative of your species, ready to receive the sacred trust of galactic fellowship." Jake, who was still mostly thinking about his missed coffee, nodded politely. "Right on. Is this going to take long? Because I'm getting kind of hungry, and I didn't see a vending machine on the way in." Phlox's gills fluttered in what Jake was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of a nervous breakdown. "The ceremony is traditional. It represents the formal welcome of humanity into the galactic community." "Cool," Jake said. "Do I need to sign anything? Because I should probably mention that I'm not technically authorized to make decisions on behalf of all humanity. I mean, I can barely make decisions for myself most days." Orthak's compound eyes somehow managed to convey the impression that he was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. The artifact we are presenting to you is not merely a gift, human Jake. It is a symbol of the tremendous responsibility that comes with joining our cosmic brotherhood. Responsibility, got it, Jake replied, though he was mostly wondering if cosmic brotherhood came with dental benefits. With great ceremony, Phlox approached a containment field that had been humming ominously in the corner of the chamber. As he deactivated the field, the humming stopped and was replaced by what could only be described as the sound of the universe holding its breath. Inside the containment field sat an object that defied easy description. It was roughly the size of a football made of what appeared to be crystallized starlight, and it pulsed with an inner fire that seemed to contain the birth and death of galaxies. Intricate patterns covered its surface, patterns that seemed to shift and change when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. "Behold," Vortak announced, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic significance. "The nexus of eternal flames. Forged in the heart of a dying star by the ancient precursors, it represents the ultimate expression of cosmic harmony and the delicate balance between creation and destruction." Jake squinted at the artifact. "It's pretty," he said. "Does it come with a warranty?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that could be heard in neighboring solar systems. "A warranty," Phlox repeated weakly. "Yeah, like if it breaks or stops working or something. I mean, it looks old, really old, and in my experience, old things have a tendency to break down at the worst possible moment." Vortak's antennae twitched violently. "Jake Thompson of Earth, this artifact contains the power to harness the energy of stellar collapse. It is attuned to the fundamental forces of the universe itself. It represents the pinnacle of ancient technology and cosmic understanding." "Okay, but does it come with a user manual?" Jake asked practically. "Because I'm pretty sure my last phone was less complicated and I still haven't figured out half the features on that thing." "The Nexus," Phlox said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a particularly dense child, "is intuitive. It responds to the will and intent of its wielder. It requires no instruction manual because it operates on a level beyond mere technical understanding." "Right," Jake said, though he was thinking about how his supposedly intuitive smart TV still required 3 different remotes and a degree in electrical engineering to change channels. "So I just use it?" "You must treat it with the reverence it deserves," Vortak insisted. "This artifact has been sealed away for millennia precisely because of its incredible power. In the wrong hands, it could theoretically reshape reality itself." Jake reached out and picked up the Nexus, causing both aliens to freeze in terror. The artifact felt warm in his hands, almost alive, and it pulsed gently with an inner light that was oddly comforting. "Huh," Jake said, turning it over in his hands like he was examining a particularly interesting paperweight. "It's really warm, like really warm. That's actually kind of nice." "Please," Phlox whispered, his scales now cycling through colors that didn't exist in any earthly spectrum. "Please, be careful with that." "Oh, I'm always careful with other people's stuff," Jake assured him, though he was mostly thinking about how the artifact's warmth felt really good on his hands. "This thing generates heat, huh? That's actually pretty useful. My apartment's always cold in the winter." And that was the moment Ambassador Phlox realized that humanity's approach to universe-ending artifacts might be slightly different from what they had anticipated. Jake's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a guy who worked IT support and had given up on impressing anyone. Functional furniture from 3 different decades, a collection of coffee mugs that had achieved sentience through sheer neglect, and a kitchen that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought cooking was a theoretical concept. He set the Nexus of Eternal Flames on his coffee table, right next to a stack of unread magazines and a remote control that had mysteriously stopped working 6 months ago. The artifact continued to pulse with its inner fire, casting dancing shadows across his living room walls. "Well, that was weird," Jake said to himself, kicking off his shoes. "But hey, free space heater." What Jake didn't know was that approximately 735 million miles away, every monitoring station in the Galactic Council was currently having what could technically be called a complete meltdown. The Nexus of Eternal Flames had an energy signature that was visible from 3 sectors away, and right now it was sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment in Denver, Colorado, next to what appeared to be leftover Chinese takeout. "Sir," reported Technician Blurble, whose species had evolved specifically to panic in 17 different ways simultaneously. "The Nexus has been activated. Energy readings are off the charts. We're detecting massive quantum fluctuations in the Sol system." Council leader Vorthak, who had been trying to convince himself that maybe humans were sensible enough to just put the artifact in a safe place and forget about it, felt his compound eyes begin to twitch. Activated? What do you mean activated? The human has interfaced with the artifact, sir. We're reading significant thermal output and quantum resonance patterns. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jake was standing in his kitchen, staring at a slice of leftover pizza that had achieved the structural integrity of cardboard through prolonged refrigeration. He glanced at the Nexus, which was still sitting on his coffee table, glowing cheerfully. "You know what?" he said to the empty apartment. "If you're going to take up space on my table, you might as well make yourself useful." He picked up the artifact and held it near the pizza. The Nexus pulsed, and suddenly the pizza was perfectly warm, with cheese that had returned to its original state of melted perfection. Jake took a bite and nodded approvingly. "Now that's what I'm talking about," he said. Back at the Galactic Monitoring Station, alarms were now blaring in 12 different languages, 3 of which were considered dead languages, and 1 of which was mostly just screaming. "Sir," Blurble reported, his panic levels now approaching critical mass, "the thermal signature just spiked. We're detecting localized reality distortion in the human's immediate vicinity." "Reality distortion?" Vortex's voice had climbed to a pitch that was causing structural damage to nearby equipment. "It appears the human has used the Nexus to alter the molecular structure of organic matter, sir. We're reading complete thermal reconstitution of what appears to be processed grain and dairy products." "He's started with food." Vortex sounded like he was trying to process information that his brain was actively rejecting. That's actually a reasonable first step for testing a universe-ending weapon." But Jake wasn't done. Over the next several days, he discovered that the Nexus was remarkably versatile. It kept his coffee at the perfect temperature all day long, which was honestly a bigger quality of life improvement than anything he'd experienced since switching to high-speed internet. It could defrost frozen meals in seconds, warm up his car on cold mornings, and even dry his socks when he forgot to do laundry. "This is the best weird alien gift ever," Jake told his coworker Marcus during their lunch break. "Watch this." He held the Nexus near his sandwich, and it went from cold to perfectly warm in about 3 seconds. Marcus, who had long ago accepted that Jake's life was inexplicably bizarre, just nodded. "Cool. Can I borrow it? My soup's cold." "Sure," Jake said, handing over what was essentially a concentrated stellar core to warm up chicken noodle soup from a can. The Galactic Monitoring Station was now in a state of chaos that defied description. Emergency protocols had been activated, evacuation plans had been drafted, and 3 different species had already begun constructing bunkers in distant star systems. "Sir," Blurble reported, his voice now barely a whisper, "the human appears to have shared the artifact with another human. We're detecting multiple users now." "Multiple users?" Vorthak's compound eyes were now twitching so fast they were creating a strobe effect. "The Nexus of Eternal Flames is being passed around like a common household appliance?" "It appears so, sir. Current applications include soup warming, beverage temperature maintenance, and what appears to be rapid moisture removal from textile materials." "Textile materials?" "Socks, sir. The human is using a stellar-powered reality manipulation device to dry his socks." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe itself was taking a moment to consider whether it wanted to continue existing. "And the other humans?" Vortek asked, weakly. "Many appear to be treating it as a novelty item, sir. We've detected at least 6 separate individuals using it for various heating applications. 1 human used it to warm up his car engine. Another used it to defrost what appears to be a frozen pizza." "A frozen pizza," Vortak repeated, his voice completely flat. "They're using the ultimate expression of cosmic power to prepare convenience food." "Yes, sir. Also, sir, the human Jake has posted something called a review on what appears to be a planetary information network. He's given the Nexus 5 stars and described it as the best desk warmer ever, totally worth the weird alien abduction experience." Vortex stared at the monitoring screens, watching as the most dangerous artifact in known existence was being used to heat up leftovers and dry laundry. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of his own sanity finally giving up and moving to a nice quiet planet where the most dangerous thing the locals did was argue about weather patterns. "Blurble," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. I want you to update my resume. I'm thinking about a career change." The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going on for 14 hours straight, and most of the representatives were beginning to show signs of what could charitably be called complete psychological breakdown. The main viewing screen displayed a real-time energy readout from the Sol system, and the readings were so far off the charts that the charts had filed a formal complaint. The situation has escalated beyond our worst-case scenarios, Ambassador Phlox reported, his scales now cycling through colors that didn't exist in nature and several that violated local physics. The human appears to be conducting systematic tests of the Nexus capabilities. What the aliens didn't know was that Jake's systematic tests consisted of him discovering that the Nexus was perfect for heating his buddy Rick's garage during their weekly poker game. Rick had been complaining about the cold for months, and Jake figured this was the perfect opportunity to field test his new space heater. "Dude, this thing is amazing," Rick said, holding his cards close to the warmth radiating from the Nexus. "Where did you say you got it?" "Alien abduction," Jake replied casually, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "They gave it to me as like a welcome gift or something. Pretty decent customer service for cosmic kidnappers." "That's cool," said Mike, who was losing badly and wasn't really paying attention. "Can you turn it up a little? It's freezing in here." Jake adjusted his grip on the Nexus, and the artifact responded by increasing its thermal output. What Jake experienced as a slightly warmer garage, the galactic monitoring stations detected as a massive spike in quantum energy that registered on sensors 3 star systems away. "Critical alert," announced the monitoring station's AI in a voice that suggested it was one system malfunction away from requesting a transfer to a nice, quiet accounting job. "Massive energy surge detected in the Sol system. Quantum signature suggests weapons testing of unprecedented scale." Council leader Vortak, who had been trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the fact that his entire worldview was crumbling around him, finally snapped. "Weapons testing? The human is testing the Nexus as a weapon?" "The energy output is consistent with preliminary weapons calibrations, sir," Blurble reported, his voice now so high-pitched it was approaching frequencies that could shatter glass. "The thermal signature suggests he's preparing for large-scale deployment." "Large-scale deployment," Vortak repeated, his compound eyes now twitching so violently they were creating their own weather patterns. "How large-scale are we talking about?" "Based on the energy readings, sir, the human appears to be preparing to heat an area approximately the size of a small building. The tactical implications are significant." What the aliens interpreted as tactical preparation, Jake was experiencing as a really successful poker night. The garage was perfectly warm, his friends were comfortable, and he was up $12, which was practically a fortune in his current economy. "You know what," Jake said, leaning back in his chair, "I should write another review. This thing is way more versatile than I thought." And that's exactly what he did. During a break in the poker game, Jake pulled out his phone and updated his previous review of the Nexus. "Update. Even better than I thought," he wrote. "Perfect for group activities. Can heat large spaces with no problem. Definitely recommend for anyone who needs reliable heating solutions. These aliens really know their stuff when it comes to practical gifts." The review was automatically translated into 17 different languages by Earth's primitive internet, and somehow through a series of quantum entanglement communication relays that nobody fully understood, it found its way to the Galactic Information Network. "Sir," Blurple whispered, his voice now barely audible, "the human has published another assessment of the Nexus. He's recommending it to other humans. He's describing it as perfect for group activities and large space heating." "Group activities," Vortak said slowly, his brain finally reaching the limits of its ability to process catastrophic information. "He's planning to distribute the Nexus to multiple human groups for large-scale operations." "It appears so, sir. The review has been disseminated across their planetary information network. Other humans are beginning to inquire about acquisition." The council chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives began shouting in languages that had been extinct for millennia. Several species started constructing emergency shelters right there on the chamber floor, and the Altarian delegate began performing what appeared to be a traditional funeral dance for the universe. "This is it," announced Council Member Zephyr, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic finality. "This is how galactic civilization ends. Not with a war, not with a natural disaster, but with humans using our most dangerous artifact to facilitate recreational activities." "We have to assume the worst," Vorthak declared, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely given up on sanity. "If the humans are conducting group testing sessions with the Nexus, we must consider the possibility that they're preparing for coordinated deployment." "Coordinated deployment of what, sir?" Blurble asked. "We don't know," Vorthak replied grimly. "But given humanity's track record for taking perfectly sensible technology and using it in ways that shouldn't be possible, I'm afraid to find out." "Sir," interrupted another technician, We're receiving reports from our deep space monitoring stations. 3 different species have detected the energy signatures and are demanding explanations. The Centaurian Empire is asking if we've started a war. The Deltans are requesting immediate evacuation assistance, and the vegans are... well, they're just screaming. The vegans are always screaming, Vorthak muttered. Yes, sir, but this time they're screaming in harmonies that are causing structural damage to their own ships. Vorthak looked around the chamber at his fellow council members, most of whom were now in various states of existential crisis. Some were drafting their wills, others were researching remote planetary real estate, and the representative from Kepler 442b was quietly packing what appeared to be a go-bag. Very well, Vorthak announced with the resigned dignity of someone who had accepted that the universe was fundamentally broken. Initiate emergency protocol 77 Alpha. Begin evacuation procedures for all non-essential personnel, and someone send a message to the Outer Rim colonies warning them to prepare for possible... whatever it is humans do when they're satisfied with their heating solutions. Sir, Blurble said quietly, what if we're overreacting? What if the humans really are just using the Nexus for heating? The silence that followed was so complete that several species independently discovered new forms of meditation just to cope with it. Blurble, Vorthak said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. In my experience, the phrase just heating and humans should never be used in the same sentence, because somehow, some way, humans will find a way to make just heating into something that defies the laws of physics and threatens the structural integrity of local space-time. So what do we do, sir? Vorthak looked at the monitoring screens, which were still showing Jake's garage poker game as a potential weapons test site, and made a decision that would either save the galaxy or ensure that his resignation letter would be remembered as the most understandable career move in galactic history. We wait, he said, and we pray to whatever deities will still take our calls that humanity's approach to universe-ending artifacts is as benign as it appears to be. Meanwhile, back in the garage, Jake was trying to figure out if a pair of kings beat a full house and wondering if he should bring the Nexus to work tomorrow. It was supposed to be cold, and the office heater had been making that weird rattling noise again. 3 days later, Ambassador Phlox made what was quite possibly the bravest decision of his career, or the most catastrophically stupid, depending on how you looked at it. He decided to visit Jake Thompson in person. The decision had not been popular with the Galactic Council. In fact, it had been so unpopular that several representatives had fainted, 2 had attempted to file restraining orders against him, and 1 had started drafting what appeared to be a preemptive eulogy. But Phlox was tired of watching the galaxy spiral into panic over what might turn out to be a massive misunderstanding. Plus, he was curious. In all his years of diplomatic service, he had never encountered a species that treated universe-ending artifacts like household appliances, and his scientific training was finally overriding his sense of self-preservation. He found Jake in his apartment, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a crossword puzzle. The Nexus of Eternal Flames sat next to him, glowing softly and keeping his coffee at the perfect temperature. Oh, hey, Jake said, looking up from his puzzle. It's the fish guy from the spaceship. Want some coffee? Phlox's gills fluttered nervously. You remember me? Of course I remember you. You gave me this awesome space heater. Best gift I've ever gotten, honestly. Usually when people give me presents it's like a tie or something equally useless. Jake gestured to the Nexus. This thing has been a game changer. Jake Thompson of Earth, Phlox began formally, then stopped. The formal approach didn't seem to work with humans. Jake, can I ask you something? Sure, go ahead. You want coffee? I just made a fresh pot and this thing keeps it perfectly hot. No more of that burnt taste you get from leaving it on the burner too long. Phlox accepted the coffee, partly out of politeness and partly because he was genuinely curious about this human beverage that seemed to be so important to their daily functioning. He took a sip and was surprised to find it was actually quite good. Jake, he said carefully, do you know what the Nexus of Eternal Flames actually is? Jake looked at the artifact, which was pulsing gently with the light of contained stars. It's a really good heater. Why? It's not just a heater, Jake. It's one of the most powerful artifacts in the known universe. It can harness the energy of dying stars. It can manipulate matter at the quantum level. In theory, it could reshape reality itself. Jake considered this information while solving 7 down, which was apparently celestial body in 6 letters. Huh, that's pretty cool. Does it have other settings? Other settings? Phlox's scales shifted to a pale blue color that indicated he was entering uncharted conversational territory. Yeah, like, can it do air conditioning? Because summer's coming up and my AC unit is older than most civilizations. Phlox stared at him. Jake, you're not concerned that you've been using a reality-altering cosmic artifact to warm up pizza? Should I be? Jake asked, genuinely puzzled. I mean, it's doing a great job, and it's not like I'm hurting anyone. If anything, I'm probably the happiest I've ever been with my heating situation. But don't you want to use it for something more significant? More important? Jake set down his pen and looked at Phlox with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for explaining things to small children or customer service representatives. Look, Phlox, right? I appreciate the gift. I really do, but I'm not really the conquering the universe type. I work in IT support. My biggest life goal is to make it through each day without anyone yelling at me about their printer being broken. But the power, Jake, the cosmic significance, the ability to reshape reality itself. Yeah. But why would I want to reshape reality? I mean, reality's got its problems, sure, but it's not like I'm qualified to fix them. I can barely keep my houseplants alive. You want me to start messing with the fundamental forces of the universe? Phlox felt something shift in his understanding of humans. So you're saying you don't want ultimate power? Ultimate power sounds like ultimate responsibility, Jake replied, returning to his crossword. And ultimate responsibility sounds like ultimate stress. I've got enough stress in my life without worrying about accidentally destroying galaxies because I sneezed wrong. But surely there's something you want to use it for, some great human ambition or dream? Jake thought about this for a moment. Well, my microwave's been making this weird sparking noise lately. You think this thing could fix that? And that was the moment Ambassador Phlox finally understood humanity. They weren't power-hungry conquerors waiting for the right weapon to dominate the galaxy. They weren't mad scientists eager to experiment with reality-altering technology. They were just people who wanted their coffee to stay warm and their microwaves to work properly. Jake, Phlox said slowly, I think I need to make a phone call. Sure, go ahead. I'll be right here if you need anything. Oh, and thanks again for the space heater. Seriously, it's the best gift ever. 20 minutes later, Phlox was standing in Jake's living room, speaking into a communicator while Jake continued working on his crossword puzzle in the background. Council Leader Vorthak, Phlox said, his voice carrying a calmness that hadn't been heard in galactic communications for days. I'm calling to report that the crisis is over. Over? Vorthak's voice crackled through the communicator with the desperation of someone who had been preparing for the end of civilization. Has the human been neutralized? Have you secured the nexus? No, sir, the human is using it to keep his coffee warm. Is coffee warm? Yes, sir. He's also expressed interest in using it to fix his microwave. There was a long pause. Ambassador Phlox, are you suggesting that the human genuinely doesn't understand the power he's wielding? Oh, he understands it, sir. He just doesn't want to use it for anything more complicated than household maintenance. Household maintenance? Yes, sir. When I explained that the Nexus could reshape reality, he asked if it had an air conditioning setting. Another pause, even longer this time. Phlox, are you telling me that we've been preparing for galactic war because a human is using the most dangerous artifact in existence as a climate control device? That's correct, sir. And he has no interest in conquest, domination, or cosmic destruction? His exact words were that ultimate power sounds like ultimate responsibility, and he has enough stress in his life without worrying about accidentally destroying galaxies. The silence that followed was different from the terrified silences of the past few days. This was the silence of an entire galactic civilization, collectively realizing that they had been overthinking the situation. Phlox, Vorthak said finally, I want you to stay there and monitor the situation. And Phlox? Yes, sir. Try the coffee. I'm curious about this beverage that humans consider important enough to use stellar energy to maintain. As Phlox ended the call, Jake looked up from his crossword puzzle. Everything okay with your space friends? They're fine, Phlox replied. They just needed to be reminded that not every species wants to rule the universe. Good for them, Jake said, returning to his puzzle. Ruling the universe sounds like a lot of paperwork. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Ambassador Phlox made a note to recommend humanity for the Galactic Council's Most Refreshingly Reasonable Species Award, assuming such an award existed. If it didn't, he was definitely going to suggest they create one. Jake finished his crossword, took a sip of his perfectly heated coffee, and wondered if he should ask the aliens if they had anything that could fix his car's weird rattling noise. After all, they seemed pretty good at practical gifts.